So Mike is
Are you going to introduce me?
Well, I'll give you a small introduction and then I guess you can introduce yourself.
I'll just awkwardly stand here.
Yeah, I'll try to say it.
I'll nod my head if he's right and I'll like shake it if he's wrong.
So Mike is a really prolific writer. Probably out of all of the people I know, I don't know anybody who puts so much work and real work into writing and the whole process and everything. So anyway, I don't want to take away from too much that he wants to discuss. So
Sure. So hi. Hey everyone. I'm Mike. I think most of us have already talked to some degree, but just to introduce myself a bit, I'm kind of from all over the place. I was born here, I was raised in Kazakhstan, I spent most of my childhood in Pakistan, I consider myself Estonian, my dad is Bulgarian, my mom is Slovakian, I came from Scotland. For the purpose of this tour, I'm already in tour guide mode, I'm also a tour guide, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm a culturally homeless writer based out of Prague. Now, I've been writing in a semi-serious fashion for the past 15-ish years to a decade, but I've been writing more professionally for the past 4 years, and COVID definitely helped me get into that. Chris invited me over here to speak a bit about writing as a job and how I got into it. And it made me reflect back on the past 15-ish years of writing. And it also kind of made me look at, like, there's basically 3 different steps to how I ended up where I am now. Big chunk of it is just studying. Those were the super early days where, for writers, what I find to be really important is to have some understanding of storytelling in general, structure, these sorts of things. There's so many great structural books to read. Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, Christopher Vogler's The Writer's Journey, a lot of them have journey in the title. But it's basically understanding that stories have a certain grammar to them. And these aren't necessarily hard, fast rules, but you know, to break the rules, you need to kind of be aware of what the rules generally are. So I find like writing books about structure to be really helpful if you're kind of starting out with writing, but also looking at a bunch of folklore, legends, these sorts of things. These are stories that have survived for thousands of years, and there's a reason why they survived. And usually that is connected to something within the human psyche. So I would say around 2012, 2013 is when I started to consider writing as a career in a more serious sort of fashion. When I was 18, what I truly wanted to do in my life was to be a marriage counselor. By the time I was 19, I was like, definitely not. And I was like, well, what else can I do? So yeah, I like telling stories, so I kind of switched over to that. So I did a bunch of independent study in terms of like folklore and mythology and these sorts of things. And then I switched over to, because I was originally a screenwriter, and I would just be like, okay, I can't afford film school, so let's do this independently. And I would do 100 movies in every single genre, read a bunch of scripts, watch a bunch of movies, take a bunch of notes. I did 100 horror films, and that's kind of the industry that I'm in right now. I did 100 Western films, which I never did anything with that, and then I did 58 romantic comedies, and I'm like, I'm done, this is too much. But going through, and if you were to look at, if I look back at my notes from these 100 horror movies, I have no idea what half of them are. But just through consuming so much, you kind of learn the structure of, let's say, a slasher film, like those Friday the 13th, Freddy Krueger sort of stuff. You start to learn these structures, and at first you know them consciously, but with enough repetition, they become just a part in the back of your brain where you start using these structures through instinct. So the first part really was just like a lot of studying, a lot of consumption of media, kind of internalizing the way that stories work or the ways that stories within a specific genre work. And the second part, this is around 2018, I was living with a woman that had like a proper adult corporate job. And I quit my job to be a writer, so every morning like she would go to work like a normal person, and I would be like, I guess I gotta do something with my day. And to put some structure to it, I started doing writing drills. So I would use a random object generator and take out 5 objects, and then for each of the objects, I would give myself 15 minutes to just like write as many story ideas as I could. And once I was like, okay, this can be a story idea, move on to the next one, the next one, the next one. Did that for about a month. The lights just almost fell off over here. Whoa! Nobody died. Yeah, exactly. The haunted theater space. There we go. As long as nobody dies. Then on the second month, after I had like this collection of, let's say, about 80 different story ideas, I went through them. I was like, which one of these can I actually write? And then I would, again, random number generator, pick out of these groups of stories, and I would actually write these scripts. And most of these scripts never ended up going anywhere. Like, they were mainly short film scripts, because that's what I thought I was going to do back then. And I think like 2 of them were ever made, which is not a great track record out of like 80 stories, or I think about 50, 60 scripts. But all of these scripts would always end up being used, salvaged for parts, basically. And it is through this repetition of constantly writing every single day that you get to a point where you just get used to doing it every single day. And I think that daily basis sort of thing is what makes it very easy to constantly write, because if you haven't written anything, it's very difficult to write down and write something. But if you're like, oh, I've already done 50 of these, it's just another day, maybe my mood is slightly different, maybe the subject is slightly different, but you know what you're doing at that point. You develop a confidence. And then I did an animated web series called Dinosaur Boy, which you can find on YouTube right now. It's perfectly mediocre. It is based off of a comic book I wrote when I was 7, and it's a gritty adaptation. When I was 7, I thought it would be a really cool idea to have a superhero who can turn into a dinosaur. And then as an adult, I was like, that's a terrifying idea, because dinosaurs are not good at solving crimes. We just murders people all the time. But then I also wrote American Ghost Hunter in Prague around 2018. Chris is in that show as well. Coming out sometime. We filmed it 2 years ago, and it's stuck in editing hell, as most projects tend to be in. But hopefully next year you'll be able to see it. But then came like a big changing moment within my career, because I was like making stuff, but it wasn't really going anywhere. And then January 2020, we were meant to shoot American Ghost Hunter in Prague around January 2020. Then it got moved to March of 2020. And then in January 2020, I was like, this is never gonna get shot. Little did I know what was gonna happen March of 2020. And COVID basically, when did we shoot it? We shot it 2021, 2022?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, it seems so long ago.
Waiting for it.
Yeah, we're both still 25. But out of frustration, January 2020, there's this corner of, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the website Reddit. It's a social media website. There's a subreddit called No Sleep, where people write short person horror stories written as a Reddit post, pretending to be real. I was like, oh, and I was scrolling through Reddit, find a story that has like 150 upvotes, which for a screenwriter, 150 people reading your thing is like a really, really big deal, because nobody ever reads scripts. Even the actors will like only read the parts that they are in. So your full story never fully comes out. And I was like, and it was a really bad story that I read. I was like, oh, I can do better than this. And then I just quickly typed something up, posted up online, gets like 250 upvotes. I'm like, wow, so many people. And I got a message from a guy being like, hey, can I read this on my YouTube channel? And at the time, I was like, that's probably some 12-year-old kid. Yeah, go ahead. And then he's like, okay. And then he sends me a link 2 days later. And I don't click the link, because I'm like, I wrote this story 5 days ago. Like, I don't need to hear somebody read it to me. And then like 5 days later, I'm like, you know what? I'm bored. Click. And I'm like, oh, this is not a 12-year-old child. This is an adult man with 2.5 million subscribers, and the story has 87,000 views. I should have gotten paid for this. And then I basically started writing short horror stories for the YouTube market, which then the pandemic hit, and then there was no film work and there was no tour guiding work. So very fortuitous sort of shift. And I've written about 200 stories now. If you ever miss my voice, there's 75 hours of it online of me just reading stories. I got a podcast called Cabinet of Fever Dreams. I got a YouTube channel, that's just Mike J. Langer. Also, if you give me your phone, I will immediately subscribe you to me. Basically my pandemic was, I was unemployed, living at home, just doing a lot of jogging and writing. And during that 1 year of like 2020, I wrote a mass amount of stuff. And I think the reason why I was able to constantly churn stuff out is because I had these practices with the writing drills that I spoke about before, where those writing drills never moved my career even the tiniest bit, but for getting used to writing every single day, which you only get used to writing every single day by writing every single day, it allowed me to be very comfortable in writing as many things as I could. And what also made it really, really easy to produce content really, really quickly is if you do stuff online, you realize sometimes things are just a dud. First story that I put out, 250 upvotes, then 87,000 views, all that sort of stuff. Second story, I'm like, this is a much better story, and I put so much effort into it. 12 people read it. And I don't think it's a worse story, it is just on the internet. If you are making content for the internet, it is a roulette wheel that you spin, and basically the computer decides how well that story does. Maybe the title, maybe the thumbnail of the YouTube video, but your role in it as a creative is important for your soul, not important for actually how many people see it, how much money it generates, how many contacts it gets you, that sort of stuff. And would also really, really help me. And if you're ever struggling with inspiration, first of all, if you want to get into writing, highly recommend No Sleep. It is one of these communities that is slowly dying off year by year because there's less people there, but it still is a fantastic place to kind of stretch your writing fingers and kind of just test it out. And if it's a bad story, nobody's gonna read it, so you don't have to feel bad. And if you title it properly and all that sort of stuff, like the only person who's gonna judge the quality of the story is you. And especially whenever I get like a big bump in my audience where like all of a sudden there's many more hundreds of people consuming my work than before, I would get like these nerves, like, how am I gonna write something that will impress all of these people? And that's when I switched over to something that I've been doing till this very day, is I just write stories for my friends. I ask them, hey, what were you scared of as a child? And then they tell me, and then to like impress them, I write a story really quickly, and they're like, cool, you're a writer. I'm like, yeah, I know. But then I release this stuff and I sell it for money, but I release it 6 months later, and usually the people that I write these stories for, they never read them. They're like, wow, cool, I'll check it out one day, and then they never do, and that's fine because other people have consumed it. But if you ever do struggle with like coming up with ideas for stories, first of all, do remember that if you're looking for like this one special magical idea, you're gonna need more if you want to do it as a career. Like you need a steady stream of stuff that you can make. And writing something specifically for your friends, or also with the audio stuff that I do right now on my YouTube channel. So I have various actors read my stories, we put in sound effects, music, all that sort of stuff. And I just kind of look forward to the day when I'm 60 and I'm like listening to these things, and then you listen back like, that's Chris's voice. Who was he again? Like these sorts of things where not only are you creating a bunch of content to grow your career, but you're also creating memories with your friends. And I would say that's like the second most important thing in the whole thing. The most important thing is like paying rent and surviving as a human being in the outside world. But if you take one bit of advice, ask your friends, what were you scared of as a kid? And write a story based off of that, because even if it's bad, you can just blame your friend for not having a good fear. And yeah, that's my little talk.